doesn't create character, it exposes it. I want that to sink in for our listeners. Most people can lead well when things are going smoothly, but when deadlines pile up, people are burned out, and the stakes feel high. That's when the real you and I show up. And for most leaders, that version isn't always the one we're proud of. We get frustrated, impatient, and more reactive. We overfunction or disengage completely.
Oh, it's so true. The other thing about how we respond when the pressure is on is the things we thought we had outgrown, all of those old bad behaviors we had done so much work on overcoming, they seem to come back real quick.
Yeah.
It's like our old habits sneak in through the back door the second the heat gets turned up.
That's
so
right.
Let me ask you this, Eric. What's going on why do we react that way to pressure? And why is it that some of us crumble under pressure while other people seem to have this ability to stay grounded?
Yeah. I think two things in this episode I want to make sure that we cover. One is I think we need a mindset shift on this concept of being under pressure. Okay. And then secondly, I think we need some practical handles on how to operate well under pressure and how to squeeze out the growth opportunities that pressure provides for us. Right. So when we feel pressure, what we're experiencing is a gap between our current capacity, our ability to do X, Y, or Z, to navigate whatever pressures we're under, and the reality that sometimes we're not. Right. And so there's a gap in terms of our expectation of what we can handle and what we can actually handle. Mm-hmm. And so we see more coming at us than we think we can handle, and we start reacting instead of responding. And some leaders go into overdrive, tightening control and micromanaging everything to keep it together. And others back off, get quiet, or avoid making decisions altogether. Both gutters on either side of this road that we're going to be talking about, I'm guilty of. And I'm sure, Don, you can share stories of that as well. Different reactions, same root issue, which is ultimately the fear of losing control.
Yeah. And for me personally, the wild part is I can often look totally composed on the outside while being in internal chaos, because pressure for all of us doesn't look like panic. Sometimes some of us are really great at pretending everyth's fine while we're actually like white knuckling our way through life at the moment.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. And so let's at this point, before we move on, I want to make a distinction between the fact that we as leaders do want to develop our capacity to operate more effectively under greater pressure, because you and I both know that life has a lot of pressure, a lot of difficult situations. And the higher we go in particular roles and responsibilities within different structures, is going to come with added pressure and difficulty.
That's right.
Right. So we're not suggesting that we shouldn't feel pressure, and we're not suggesting that we shouldn't learn how to operate well under pressure. But what we are talking about is that fine line between the space between being able to handle the pressure that we've grown to carry up to this point in our life, and when we cross that line into the space where we begin to default to unhelpful attitudes and behaviors. So when we lead from that space you're referred to in this white knuckling it, right? We're holding on for dear life. Even when the work still gets done, everyone around us begins to feel that stress oozing out of us. Pressure leaks. It spreads through tone, energy, timing, and how we communicate. And we have to remember that we can only give others what we first cultivate internally, right? That's one of our core leadership mantras. So internally, we're cultivating, stewing on stress, anxiety, fear, frustration, anger, hostility, whatever it is, then that is ultimately what's going to leak out of us. Mm-hmm. So it's good for our listeners to understand that concept, that, again, we're not talking about faking it until you make it, which I think is a popular kind of mantra that I've heard out there. Yeah. This is more about paying attention to what's going on when we're under pressure, and whether we've crossed that line from, hey, I can carry this weight, to I'm not carrying this weight very well anymore.
That's right. And it makes me think of a recent episode that we did about getting comfortable with resistance.
Yeah.
Right. This is that same idea where if we push through the resistance too quickly, we find ourselves in that white knuckling situation on the road to burnout. It's that ability to stay in the resistance so that you are actively growing and increasing your capacity that lets us continue to be able to handle more and more pressure as the best version of ourselves. But before we get there, it's important for us to recognize that our temperament, what's going on internally, becomes our team's temperature. If you are anxious, short, or frantic, that becomes the culture we're cultivating, even if we never say a word about it.
Oh gosh, I love that. I'm gonna repeat that phrase you just said. That our temperament, however we're operating, right, at a mental, emotional, and physical level, that temperament becomes the temperature of our team. Like, as leaders, as human beings, we have so much more authority and power than we understand by how we show up to any space, right? Which includes our body language, which includes, everything about the way we communicate in that space. So here's an analogy that I want to encourage our listeners with. And I'm stealing this from somebody else. I don't remember where I got it from. So I give credit to that person, even though they're unknown in my brain. They know, you know who you are. But I often talk to our clients about the difference between being a thermostat and a thermometer, right? Like, so technically a thermometer reflects the temperature of the prevailing environment, right? So we stick a thermometer in our kids' mouths so we can understand and reflect the temperature of their body. You put a thermometer into, the turkey at Thanksgiving to make sure that it's been cooked long enough. So it tells us the temperature of what's going on in that environment. That's different to a thermostat. Thermostat has the ability to determine and shape or change or control the temperature of any environment. And I think more often than not, what happens when we're in a reactive state, when we've crossed that line from I can carry this weight effectively to I'm no longer carrying this weight or this pressure effectively, right? Because we talk about this a million times. As human beings, we all have a capacity. And it's not until we hit the end of that capacity that we realize, oh, I can't carry the weight. Like we talked about this in previous episodes. If I go to the gym and I can bench 100, and I'm just guessing because I don't do benching anymore, but if I can bench 160 pounds, right? And then I try 170, but I can't push it up. Well, now I've reached the end of my capacity. Now I know where growth is available for me. If I want to increase my capacity in any area, I don't even know where that begins until I run into the end of my capacity. And this is why we say hitting the end of your capacity, even though it feels terrifying and we do make some mistakes in that space, is actually a gift, because what it's revealing to us is here's your gap of growth. Here's your opportunity,
your growth edge
to practice lifting more weight, because the only way you're going to lift more weight is by practicing lifting more weight until you can lift more weight. And that goes for any area of our life, right? But so often, because we run into what we call failure in that moment, which it is technically a failure, then what do? We feel ashamed and guilty and bad. And then we want to either, screw this isn't even worth learning to do, or we make excuses, right, for why this isn't the right thing to do or why we can't do it. It's somebody else's fault usually. So going back to this metaphor or analogy, whatever it is, of thermostat versus thermometer, I think our opportunity, our responsibility as leaders is to remember that we are meant to be thermostats, and we're meant to read the temperature of the room, which your thermostat has. It'll tell you what the current temperature of the room is, and then to determine, do we need to raise or lower the temperature? And then the ability, the influence to be able to impact that environment to begin to change the temperature of that environment. And I think for us as leaders, the moment we realize I have a choice in any given situation, in any environment, am I going to be the thermostat or the thermometer?
Yeah, that's so good. I think that's a really helpful analogy. But like with anything, I always want to know, how do we do this? So talk to us about how we coach our clients so that they're behaving as a thermostat more often than they're behaving like a thermometer?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, I'll say this, the same way that you and I practice this all the time, right? Because
Yeah.
we practice what we preach.
Mhm.
When we coach leaders through various experiences of pressure, because it's inevitable, that's really why we have a company at some level. We always start with awareness, not strategy,
Oh, yes.
right? Because when it comes to our toolkit, we often say that self-awareness must precede self-leadership,
Yeah, it has
right?
to.
Yeah. Because you can't change what you can't see. And so we have to develop the skills of paying attention to our internal temperature, right? Our temperament, what's going to come out of us, so that we can determine, is that the temperature with which I want to influence the room, the environment around me, right? So here's some simple questions that we can start asking ourselves at any given moment where we feel, like the temperature's rising. Why am I under pressure?
Mhm.
And when I'm under pressure, what version of me is showing up? Going back to those default,
Yeah.
self-protecting, usually those, but here's the other good news. Sometimes we're going to find that we're actually operating really well in that moment, and that's to be celebrated.
Mhm.
But it's to pay attention to either one. How am I operating in this moment? Is it the version of me that I think is in everybody's best interest? Or is it the version of me that is defaulting to, our what we call the victim or villain mindset
Right.
or mentality?
Mhm.
Did I get rigid and try to control outcomes? Do I retreat and disconnect? Do I double down on tasks but lose sight of people? And there's a whole list of other questions that we could ask ourselves to help us understand not only what's happening in us, but how are we impacting the people and the environment around us. These are what we call pressure tells, right? Pressure tells. These are the indicators that help us recognize that we have agency, that we have choice to decide how we want to operate in these situations. So going back to what we call the $1 million question, that when we're in these situations, we always have permission to slow down, to ask these questions we've already named, these to reflect on what's going on internally, and then to simply ask this $1 million question. How does the best version of me respond to the situation? And as a matter of fact, on true story, I was on a call with a client's son who's off at college,
Mhm.
freshman in college. And we can all, if we've been to college, we can all remember the pressures and the stresses and the anxiety of being away from home for the first time, and nobody there to manage your life and schedule and your needs and to take care of you and all that kind of stuff, right? And here's what's amazing. At like 17, 18 years old, I'm teaching this young man the power of this question. Within 2 or 3 short weeks, he starts telling me stories of how that's literally transforming the way that he shows up to so many situations, because he'll feel the indicators of being under pressure, stress, anxiety, right? He starts heating up internally. He wants to withdraw. He wants to get angry and overpower. And he's training himself, coaching himself to pause and say, whoa, if I'm feeling this, then I know I have permission to slow down and ask the simple question. How does the best version of me? And he's the answers he's coming up with at that age are like almost exactly what I would recommend him to do in those situations. It's uncanny.
I love that because it reflects what you often say, which is choice is our superpower.
Yeah.
When we are able to pause, then reflect, then we get to choose. And so often we get stuck in this trap of feeling like our default behaviors are out of our choice, right? They just come out of us. I can't control it. But when we do slow down and reflect, we actually do have the choice of how we want to proceed.
I love
And
that.
that is the game changer here. It's really important because most people, we operate with the idea that the goal is to eliminate pressure.
Yeah.
Let me get to the point where I don't have any pressure anymore. And it's like, honey, that's not ever gonna happen.
Never gonna happen.
And in fact, as we grow in our leadership in life, the pressure only increases.
Yeah.
So the goal is not to eliminate pressure. The goal is to build enough internal stability, enough internal capacity that the pressure doesn't get to call the shots.
Woo! Wow. Okay. Well, I know this is kind of a callback to the first season of our podcast where we unpacked a bunch of our core tools from our leadership operating system. But I think it's important, right? Because I know a lot of our listeners have shared how grateful they are that we did record that first season. So they have a reference point. And now we have our books, our newest book, which just came out, Upgrade Your Leadership, which has all of our core 8 tools from our leadership operating system unpacked for you in simple form. We have videos, online videos, and training. We have, just so much available. But I do want to call back to the first season because we unpacked some of our core tools. Number one being the EQ matrix, the emotional intelligence matrix. Okay, and the other one being the Kairos circle, because these are tools that help us interpret more effectively what we're experiencing, to diagnose how we are responding, and then to determine how we do want to move forward in any situation, right? So they give us language for what's happening internally, which is so important, because if we don't have language or an interpretive lens, then what happens is every experience feels like a new mystery that has to be solved. Right. Rather than, if we have the right interpretive lenses, we can see things more clearly so that we can respond more effectively. But really, the game, like you said, increasing our capacity is identifying the moments when we feel increasing pressure, to give ourselves permission to pause, to reflect on the situation, and to make a choice not to let the world around us make that choice for us. But this is a daily work, right? Like, we don't go to the gym and increase our muscle capacity in 1 or 2 sessions, right? This is like an ongoing, regular leadership grind. Like, I don't know that I've ever heard anybody use that phrase. So maybe we're coining it right now. But like, if you want to grow and develop in any area of your life, you have got to be committed to the grind. You've got to fall in love with whatever it is that you're wanting to learn, what my good friend calls the crafts of life. Like, what's the craft of in marriage and parenting and finances and building a business and entrepreneurialism, in politics and social issues? Like, what is the craft that we're developing, and are we committed to the grind of that craft? But this grounded leadership that we're talking about comes from consistent habits of reflection, of honest feedback, and healthy rhythms that keep us steady when the world around us isn't.
Yeah, and that's so important, and why I love these tools, and do want to encourage everybody that's listening to go back and listen to the tool specific episodes if this is something that you're wanting to go deeper on, because when we find ourselves under pressure, that is not the time to reinvent ourselves.
Nope.
It's not the time to try new strategies, engage new practices. No, it's the time to rely on the practices that we've already built.
I love that. I love that.
It's the time to return to the things that remind us, I've been here. I've been here already. I've done this work. I have a tool that helps me get through this, right? It's the time to return back to some of those things to remind us of who we are and how we want to lead.
Yeah, it reminds me of, obviously, I'm sure a lot of our listeners have experience, as in athletics, or in music, or in any other significant skill they developed over the years. But, every skill requires fundamentals, like the basic building blocks of doing what you can do. And they say that even at a professional level, in any sport or performance capacity, right? Like, those pros practice the fundamentals, right? Because it's our ability to do the fundamentals well under pressure that gives us the competitive advantage in any situation.
That's right.
And so I love what we're talking about, because it takes me all the way back to that there was a time when I did not have leadership fundamentals, right? Like, I just, no one had taught me or trained me in any of this stuff. And I know that even before this call, I was sharing with you that, as a business, we're constantly trying to explore and identify, like, how do we communicate who we are as a coaching business? What sets us apart, and what is our vision and our mission? And, what is the, what is the great evil in the world that we're fighting against, right? That we're wanting to triumph over. And the evil that I come back to over and over is what I would consider a radical injustice that we spend years, if not decades, in different educational systems that rarely, if ever, include training and equipping in leadership fundamentals. Mm-hmm. Most of us would look back and say, we didn't get this in our households. We didn't get this in school. We didn't get this when we entered into the business world and took on our entry-level jobs. And here's the crazy part, Don. You and I have both heard from so many executives who are successful at crazy high levels across lots of industries. When they say, why didn't I get this stuff earlier? Where was this when I was entering into the kind of roles and responsibilities of leadership within organizations? And I say, that is an injustice that we want to transform, that we want to deal with, because fundamentally, we as human beings have the right, I think it's like a human fundamental right, to be trained in these leadership fundamentals that we can then build on for the rest of our lives. Otherwise, what happens is what's really being exposed under pressure is a faulty foundation. More often than not, it's a faulty foundation that if we don't learn to secure, that we will constantly find ourselves upset over and over. That's why we call our toolkit a leadership operating system. It's a platform. It's a foundation upon which we feel confidence to stand upon and say, no matter what comes my way, I have the basic skills and tools to navigate those challenges in a way that brings the best version out of me rather than the worst.
That's right. And this is a practice that you and I ongoing are engaging in. So why don't we share a couple real life stories of where we've seen this in action in our own lives or with clients?
I love it. And to our listeners, if they hear me sniveling and coughing, it's because I'm on the back end of a cold. And they got the best of me over the weekend, but I'm back in action. I'm ready to go. This conversation reminds me of a story that I think I shared quickly in one of our earlier books called Leadership Gravitas. But it's kind of one of those, through your life, you can look back and say, there's probably 10, 20 moments in our life that really shaped us. And this is one of them. I was, in my mid-30s, I was working for a former mentor. It was an apprenticeship style situation where, he was training me to become a better leader. I was helping him to build a coaching business. That was the mutual exchange, which happens to be where I fell in love with the work of coaching, because what I realized is really what we're doing is training other people to do the stuff that we desperately learned, on our own journeys. But it was a moment where he invited me over to his home. He wanted to have a conversation, and he was watching a TV show. And so I sat quietly for 15 minutes until there was a commercial break. And then he turned to me and he said, "Hey, what's going on?" I said, "I don't know. You called me here." And he said, "Well, it's come to my attention that the team's not responding well to your leadership right now." And I said, "Well, okay, what do you mean by that?" And he said, "Well, Eric, I know the business is growing rapidly. I know you're overseeing a large portion of all of our training and our coaches development. And I know you're probably a little bit overwhelmed, but I need you to understand that the way you're operating is impacting the team poorly. And they're growing increasingly frustrated with you and the way you're showing up to various meetings and the way you're engaging in different, decision-making processes." And I was like, and of course, everything in me is just like raging to come to my own defense and explain, why the team's, messing up and why they're not doing enough, why they're not pulling their weight, and why blah, 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 all that, that was all in me. But I had learned up to that point that blaming everybody else wasn't going to solve anything, and it wasn't going to be in my best interest. And so I listened and I said, "Hey, I hear what you're saying, and I'm sorry for that." And I said, "Well, what should I do? And he said, well, hey, listen, why don't you put the things that we've been learning together into practice? And why don't you coach yourself through this? And so I left his house. And as I was driving back to our home, because we were that evening going to be hosting a bunch of clients that were in town for like a big dinner. It was a part of our training process back then. And when I was driving home, I just was so, the pressure was building to the point where I was going to pop. And I didn't know what to do because I didn't know how to coach myself through the situation. And then I had to go host these people. So on the way home, we happened to live in a little beach town on the East Coast. I stopped by the beach and I just said, I'm going to go for a quick walk and try to like blow off some steam. And so as I'm walking, this is like, winter time, and it's cloudy and it's, kind of almost misty and not a lot of people out on the beach. And so I'm walking down the beach in my work clothes, and I get to this point where I'm just like internally, like almost screaming, like just not out loud, but internally, like, what the F is wrong with me? Why can't I figure this out? Why is this so difficult? Why am I not leading more effectively? What's going on for me? And I was just wow, it was all mounting. And as I'm walking down, and it's getting more intense, this voice comes into my brain, right? And the question comes to me, what are you so afraid of? What are you so afraid of? And I'm like, what do you mean? What am I so? I'm not afraid. I'm a leader. Like, I've got this all handled. I got this under control. Like, I'm not afraid of anything. But that question kept coming back and over and over. What are you so afraid of? What are you so, to the point where, like, I remember I started tearing up, right? Because the emotion it was needing to come out somewhere. And so now I'm crying, walking down the beach, looking like a weirdo. And I'm, hand gestures everywhere. And
people are steering clear of you on the beach.
Yeah. The people that could see me from a distance were definitely wondering what the heck's going on with this guy and what's he on. And I got to this point where I'm like, I'm starting to connect with, like, yeah, I'm afraid that I'm going to fail as a leader. I'm afraid that my team won't want to be on my team. I'm afraid that these projects that I've been working so hard to lead our team on would fall apart or fall through or not be as great as we thought they were. I was concerned about our client base and, how that would impact them. There was just so much pressure that I was carrying, but ultimately all of it, going back to what we said earlier, was this fear of not being able to control the outcomes, not being able to control my team, not being able to control all the factors. And then I heard this crazy voice because the first voice was, what are you so afraid of? Right. Which, this is a question my mentor had asked me over and over and over again. It was like seared into my mind. And here it was coming back and partnering me in this moment. And then another voice, like, Eric, just die to it all. Just die to it all. I'm like, die to what? And I think that the meaning of that in that moment was surrender to it. Like, surrender to this. Not surrender to the fear and give into the fear, but surrender your need to have control. You surrender your need to have this particular reputation. Surrender this need to be able to, control outcomes. And I remember I was looking out at the ocean. I'm fully clothed. I look out at the ocean, and this crazy idea came to my brain, like this feeling of like I need to go in that water. And it's almost like a baptism of sorts, right? That's the whole point for those of us who understand the concept of baptism. It's the concept of, like, you go under the water that represents a kind of dying to some prior identity. And then you emerge from the water and, like, with a fresh new identity and this fresh sense of who you are and what life is going to be about. And so I just literally fully clothed, walked out into the ocean water to the point where I was completely submerged. I came out of the water, started to walk back up to the shoreline, and literally I'm expecting some, like, magical experience where all of a sudden, God appears to me and he's
heavens opened.
Heavens open. It was this really powerful thing. And it was nothing. It was just nothing. And I remember thinking, I was a little disappointed, thinking, like, wait, where's that moment? Where's that magical moment? Like the movie moment. And then it was like this like insight came to me. Oh, this isn't sexy. Oh, right. This isn't that sexy moment in the movie where we all watch, get inspired. Like the 30-second, what they call one of my favorite podcasts. He calls it the Rocky cutscene. Right. It's like 30 seconds of showing all the hard work he did to get in shape for the big boxing match. Yeah. It's that 30-second, snippets where we find that the hero of the movie, trains and gets ready for something big. And I remember just this insight of like, no, this work that you're doing is not sexy. This work of surrendering to your need to control everything around you, to control outcomes and to control people, to protect your reputation. This is not sexy. This is a day in and day out work.
That's right.
And right. So if it's big and glamorous and sexy, right, it's kind of like up to that point in my life, I'd always seen surrender as like like the theater actors. It's dramatic and it's big and you have an audience and everybody like claps because you're so good at like suffering in your developmental journey. But this was like a new version of like, no, this is just a part of adulting. This is a part of maturation, of development, of transformation. And it's a daily activity. It's not a one-time every 10 years activity. But here's on the other side of that, my mentor had constantly said to me, Eric, everything in life is a test. And why do you take tests in school? Not to expose failure, not to catch you. The goal of a test is simply to help reflect back to you how much you've grown and where you still need to grow. And he said, the sooner you wake up to the fact that everything in life is a test, it's either revealing that you've developed your capacity, you've developed your skills, you've developed your ability to handle that aspect of life, or it's revealing to you that there's a growth edge and you have an opportunity to grow. But either way, that moment transformed the way that I see pressure, the way that I see challenges in life. Now I see them as opportunities rather than obstacles. Now I see them as the gifts they really are, which is they are just simply another test to help me see more clearly what's going on inside of me so that I can either celebrate that I've grown in that area and I have what it takes to handle it, or that I don't. Yeah. But which creates an opportunity for increased growth and development.
That's right. That's right. Well, I'm going to share a story that I wasn't planning on sharing, but it's your story sparked it in me. And so I'm going to share the time that my life felt the most on fire, the time that I was probably the most under pressure. I'd been working for.
You're saying you're using on fire as a negative thing, not like that. I'm on fire. I'm feeling great. No. It's a negative fire. Okay, got it. I just want to make sure I'm listening.
A dumpster fire to clarify. Dumpster not a good fire, a dumpster fire. Yeah. So I'd been working for this organization for over 10 years. I'd grown up the ranks in leadership. They brought in a new leader to truncate the story because it's obviously very long. Shortly after he arrived, he started sexually harassing me.
Oh no.
And I was the most senior female leader. So I felt a great responsibility for all of the other young women that were on our team to try to withstand this pressure, but then to put things to rights, to be like, this isn't acceptable. We're not going to run an organization where this is tolerated. And I'm not going to put all of these other young women at stake for experiencing the same thing. So, as is unfortunately a very common story, and I'm sure some of our listeners will resonate with this. And this was like, I think 10 years, this was about 10 years ago, which is crazy to think. But in those days, pre Me Too movement, it was much easier for them to make me the villain and make me go away, organizationally speaking, than to hold this man accountable. And essentially that's what happened. And it grew to the point where I did have to bring a sexual harassment lawsuit. Like I found myself in a situation I never had dreamed of being in. And I was literally under the most pressure I had ever experienced in my life. People from the organization were choosing sides and horrible things were being said about me online and in person. And we had it was like a community. And so everybody in this community now had opinions about things that frankly they didn't know the details about, right? And I remember in those days, early days, when I was being pushed out, the writing was kind of on the wall, and people were starting to make up their minds and make up their stories about what was going on. I said to my husband, who Drew wanted to light the world on fire, obviously.
Yeah, I can imagine it.
And I said to him, look, we have absolutely no control in this situation. The only thing that we can control is how we choose to respond. And essentially, right, I was using the language of our pathway of personal responsibility before I even knew that that was a thing. But I just knew that I had been so stripped of every agency that I had, every shred of control that I could bring to bear in this situation, that literally the only thing that I could control was how I decided to respond. Was I going to bark back? Was I going to spread my truth online? Was I going to go to news media and do all this different stuff? And I just remember feeling like I am under so much pressure. However, the one thing that I get to decide in this moment is that I'm going to behave according to my values, according to my beliefs, and I'm going to be that version of myself that I want to be. But it took pausing, reflecting on what was actually, like, what is happening right now.
Yeah.
And then harnessing that superpower of being like, I still get to choose.
Yeah.
This self-awareness, this self-leadership is literally the only thing that I get to choose, and nobody's going to take that from me. And that mantra of like, we don't get to control how other people are behaving, but we do get to control how we show up and how we operate, has become I've said that to my kids countless times over the years.
Yeah.
Because it has just become so ingrained and foundational in how I believe I have to show up when I'm under pressure.
Let me, first of all, thank you for sharing that on this podcast. I know you and I are committed to sharing out of the overflow of our own journeys to give encouragement and permission for our listeners to be on their journey. But let me say this to highlight what I'm hearing in what you're saying. I think sometimes we think the freedom that we're looking for is found in not feeling pain, and not feeling sorrow, and not feeling loss, and not dealing with failure, and not dealing with, broken dreams or unmet expectations, or the kind of bullshit that you were dealing with in that environment, right? Like, we think it's almost like a freedom is really a freedom from all of these pressures and challenges, right?
Exactly.
But real freedom, that's not freedom. That's freedom from the world. I mean, that's basically like, you got to check out from life, because life is full of these experiences, big and small. But real freedom is found in realizing that the world doesn't get to determine and define who we are and how we show up.
That's right.
And how we operate. That's where real freedom is found, right? And I think that's the freedom that we're all longing for, is how do we, under great pressure, operate with that freedom, right? Where the tail's not wagging the dog, where our emotions and the difficulties of life are not dictating our attitudes and behaviors, but where we are in the driver's seat and we feel the power of choosing who we are and how we're going to show up, rather than letting the world and the challenges choose those for us. Gosh.
And that's how we grow under pressure. That's how we harness pressure to use it to level up.
Yeah.
Otherwise, pressure just crushes us.
Woo. Okay, hold on. I'm going to repeat that, because that's so good. We're talking about how we leverage pressure or harness pressure to level up. Yeah. Because it's always an opportunity to either expose our growth that we have experienced or new opportunities for growth, rather than what often happens is the pressure crushes or breaks us.
Yeah.
Oh gosh, I love that. That literally flips so much of our life experiences on its head.
Yeah. It's a mindset shift. And it changes how you approach and engage those moments of pressure.
Yeah. Yeah. And this goes back to what I said earlier, which is these are the things that if we don't learn, what we discover is that ultimately we sabotage our own success.
That's right.
Right. But we
Our
blame
own
the world.
lives, our own well-being
Yeah.
at a more like fundamental level.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Okay. All right. Well, I know we're going long. This is powerful stuff. So I don't want to rush through it, but let's jump into some practical applications.
Yeah.
So for our listeners, I'm sure this is resonating with everyone that's listening to this podcast. And again, thank you for spending this time with us. Here's what I want to encourage us this week is to think about maybe just at least one situation right now that feels heavy and high pressure.
Mm-hmm.
And to ask some simple questions like, what version of me is showing up?
Yeah.
Right. When I'm under pressure, what are those default attitudes and behaviors? And to celebrate where we're operating well and to recognize where maybe we're not operating well. Are we defaulting to the fixer? Are we defaulting to the avoider? Are we defaulting to the overachiever? Are we defaulting, to just shutting down altogether and withdrawal? Because again, if we can't name it, we can't change it. Mm-hmm. So the first order of business is self-awareness, recognition, and naming what's going on so that we can choose. That's the beginning of the process of then making a choice of how do we want to show up.
Right. And then once we've done that work of assessing, right, we can take it one step further and ask that question, that $1 million question that you referenced. What does the best version of me look like in this moment? How does the best version of me show up? Or how does the version I'm aspiring to, how does she respond in this situation? And it means that we have to pause before we react. It means asking those clarifying questions. It means maybe taking a walk before we send an email or snap back with a snarky remark. But those little pauses, when we're talking about like, what's one practical step I can take?
Yeah.
It's this pause. Practice this pause, people, because that's where we create stability. And that when we do that as leaders, we create stability not only for ourselves, but for everyone around us.
And let me just point this out because I want to capture the power of your story here for a second. A friend of mine recently said, Eric, I love this question of how does the best version of me show up to the situation? He said, sometimes I like to think of 1 or 2 years from now, 3 years from now, when I look back and reflect on how I responded or how I engaged, like what version of me will I feel most proud of? Because the decision you made to confront the perpetrator, for lack of a better word, of this leader in your former organization must have been scary, terrifying. The implications, the fallout, the ramifications of actually taking a stand in that moment would have been so, I would imagine, scary. Like I feel scared just thinking about having to make a stand like that. And I think for our listeners, recognizing that sometimes the best version of us is going to be to set boundaries. It is going to be to call something out that's an injustice or unhealthy or dysfunctional. It's going to be to walk away from a relationship or from a job or whatever it is, right? Like it's going to be to be okay to disagree with somebody on some perspective that might create conflict. And so I want to make sure for our listeners that we understand the weight of, the idea of like, what does the best version of me do? It can sound a little like, oh, it's easy and no big deal. But sometimes it does require incredible bravery and courage, which I think, people like Brene Brown and others have been so paramount in helping us understand the bravery of showing up in our authentic self and being true to our core values and principles. So I just want to make sure that gets said.
That's an important point.
Yeah. Okay. Gosh, we've gone long. I am so grateful for this conversation, Don. It just reminds me of how proud I am of the people that we're trying to continually become And I know so many of our listeners are on this journey of fighting this fight. And we want you to know you're not alone. We're in this together with you. You're in this with us. So if this episode does hit close to home, we want to encourage you to share it with anyone and everyone that you think might benefit from this conversation. The truth is, none of us are immune to the challenges of pressure. And none of us are immune to discovering where we can carry that pressure well and where we need to grow and develop. But the beautiful thing is, the hope is that we all have an opportunity to learn how to operate more effectively under pressure. And this goes back to like the fundamentals of leadership. We have to get this into the hands of more people, this leadership operating system.
Yeah. I mean, I'm so passionate about it because it is the difference between being crushed by the pressure. Like, I don't want anybody out there to feel like they are under a pressure that is going to crush them. And these tools, these processes are how you practically walk your way out from underneath that pressure.
Yeah.
So
Wow.
we believe in this stuff.
Yeah.
And if you believe in it, and if you're looking for more, I want to remind you that we are hosting monthly virtual masterclasses. And to be honest, podcast community, we designed these with you in mind, because we're like, what's the next thing that we can invite our podcast community to engage in? And we know you're scattered across the country. And we're just so grateful for everybody who has been engaged in listening to these. And so these master classes really are for you. So we'd love for you to be there, to get the chance to see your faces, to know who's tuning in and listening. So like I said, they're going to be monthly. Head over to mpwrcoaching.com/masterclass to sign up for the next session. And as always, you can find the links to that and any other things we referenced here in our show notes.
I love that. Please take advantage of that. If you consider yourself a part of the empowered tribe, as I am now lovingly calling our growing community, please know that our journey is one of empowering ourselves and empowering those around us to make the world a better place. Next week, we're going to be unpacking the dangers of uncommunicated or unmet expectations and how to ensure that we don't get sabotaged by them. Until next time.